My wife left me because her mother told her I would never amount to anything. She said I was a failure, unworthy of her daughter, and she convinced Marina to divorce me. They took everything from me in the settlement. The $3.8 million mansion I built with years of sweat and sacrifice. Gone. The life I thought I was creating for us. Ripped away as if it never mattered. 6 months later, when I was barely holding myself together in a run-down apartment, there was a knock at my door. A lawyer stood there with a black briefcase in his hand. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "Your ex-wife's father wants to meet you. He has something that belongs to you." I didn't know what to think. But when I saw what was inside that briefcase, my chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I never imagined my life would unravel the way it did. For years, I believed I was building something solid, something lasting. Not just for me, but for my wife Marina and the future we once dreamed of together. I was a construction man, not a man of fancy words or lofty promises. I worked with my hands, I managed crews, I made sure houses stood tall against storms. That was my pride. It was never glamorous, but it was honest, and it put food on the table. When I first met Marina, I thought I had found my partner in every sense of the word. She had this grace about her, a confidence that seemed untouchable. She was the kind of woman who could walk into a room and silence it without saying a word. I loved her instantly. But from the very beginning, I felt the sharp eyes of her mother, Dahlia Crestwood, studying me like I was an unwelcome guest in her home. Dahlia was a woman who believed in bloodlines, status, and reputation. To her, I was a worker in muddy boots, a man with rough hands, and nothing more. I remember one Thanksgiving dinner early in my marriage when I tried to tell a story about the house I was building for a young family. Marina smiled at me with warmth, but Dahlia cut me off with a cold laugh. "Marina," she said, turning to her daughter while ignoring me, "a man who spends his life hammering nails will never bring you the life you deserve. You should be careful not to waste your best years waiting for him to grow into something he cannot be." I swallowed my pride that night, forcing a smile and pouring myself more wine, but her words burned into me like acid. For a while, Marina defended me. She would tell her mother that she loved me, that we had a future. And I believed her. We bought a home together in California, and when the business grew, I poured every cent I could into making that place our sanctuary. Eventually, it became a mansion, worth nearly $4 million, sitting on a rise where you could see the ocean on clear mornings. Every brick, every plank, every stone was a piece of me. I told myself it was proof that Dahlia was wrong, proof that I could give Marina the life she deserved. But money and houses don't build love if poison is dripping in the background. Dahlia never stopped whispering into Marina's ear. Over the years, I noticed subtle changes. Marina started repeating her mother's phrases. "You work too much. Why don't we have more? You'll never be like the men Mother knows." I tried to brush it off, tried to remind her that we were building this life together, but her patience for me began to fade. My mother, Irene, saw it long before I did. She was a gentle woman, a church-going woman who always believed in hope. She would place her hand on mine and say, "Ethan, you are enough. Don't let that woman make you doubt yourself." My younger brother Caleb also warned me. "She's not standing with you, brother. A wife is supposed to be on your side, no matter what her mother says." I wanted to believe Marina loved me enough to fight for us, so I ignored the warning signs. The day the divorce papers were delivered felt like a punch I never saw coming. Marina stood in the kitchen of the home I built and told me it was over. She didn't cry. She didn't falter. She just said the words like they had been rehearsed. "Mother was right, Ethan. You'll never be more than a failed dreamer. I can't keep living like this." My knees almost buckled. I wanted to shout, to ask her how she could throw away everything we had built, but the look in her eyes told me the decision had been made long ago. The divorce hearings were brutal. Dahlia sat in the courtroom with her chin high, satisfied as the lawyers tore apart my life. Marina walked away with nearly everything: the mansion, the savings, the cars. I was left with scraps, debts from the business, and a hollow chest that felt like it would never fill again. Walking out of that courthouse was the loneliest moment of my life. I remember standing on the steps outside, watching her drive away in a car I had paid for, while Dahlia's eyes met mine one last time. She didn't have to say a word. Her smirk told me I was finished. I moved into a small apartment after that. The wallpaper was faded, the pipes clanged in the night, and the refrigerator made a constant groaning sound. It was a far cry from the mansion where I used to watch the sun rise with a cup of coffee. Every corner of that apartment felt like defeat. I worked odd jobs to keep myself afloat, the kind of work that paid just enough to cover rent and keep me from going hungry. Pride kept me from asking Caleb or my mother for money, though both offered. I drank more than I should have, stared at the walls more than a man should, and wondered if Dahlia had been right all along. Those 6 months were the darkest of my life. The silence in that apartment was heavier than any noise. Every night I lay awake thinking about what I could have done differently, where I had gone wrong. Marina was gone, Dahlia had won, and I was left with nothing but memories of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. I thought that was the end of my story. I thought I had been cast aside for good, but life has a way of surprising you, sometimes when you least expect it. The weeks after the divorce were filled with a dull ache that refused to leave. I woke up every morning in that small apartment and felt the same crushing weight on my chest. Some days I stared at the ceiling, wondering how I could have gone from owning a mansion by the ocean to sleeping on a sagging mattress in a room that smelled of mildew. The humiliation was constant, and it wasn't just about losing the house or the money. It was about losing Marina. It was about knowing she had looked at me, a man who gave her everything he could and decided I was not enough. The settlement had left me nearly bankrupt. The mansion, the cars, the savings, all gone. I tried to keep the construction business afloat, but I no longer had the resources to keep up with projects. Clients drifted away, sensing weakness. Some even whispered that Marina and her mother had been right all along, that Ethan Rourke was finished. It felt like the whole world was watching me collapse, and I could not stop it. Dahlia Crestwood did not miss her chance to twist the knife. One afternoon, as I was leaving the courthouse after finalizing the transfer of the mansion, she caught me in the parking lot. Her perfume hit me first, sharp and overpowering, and then her voice cut into me like a blade. I told Marina you would never amount to anything. You proved me right. Men like you always fall back into the mud where they belong. She turned on her heel before I could answer, sliding into her black town car with the smugness of someone who had won a lifelong battle. I stood there, gripping my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms. My blood boiled, but my voice caught in my throat. What she did not know was that her words played in my head every night. It was not just a victory for her, it was a curse for me. I could not silence it. The more I tried, the louder it became. You will never amount to anything. My mother, Irene, tried to comfort me in her gentle way. She would come by with casseroles, the kind she used to make when I was a boy. She would set them on the counter and say, "Ethan, a man's worth is not measured by his house or his bank account. It is measured by his heart." She looked at me with eyes full of compassion, but I could see the worry behind them. She was afraid the bitterness would consume me. Caleb, my younger brother, was less delicate. He walked into my apartment one evening with a six-pack and said, "You are letting them win. Dahlia gets stronger every time you sit here and drown yourself in self-pity. You think you're beaten? No, brother, you're still breathing, and as long as you're breathing, you can fight." He was right, but at the time, his words only stung. I wanted to fight, but I didn't know how to rise when everything had been stripped away. The world felt small in that apartment. The days blended together. I worked odd jobs, patching roofs or repairing fences, the kind of labor that barely kept me afloat. Each paycheck disappeared quickly, swallowed by rent and bills. Nights were worse. I sat alone with my thoughts, staring at old photographs of Marina and me in better times. Her smile in those pictures haunted me, because it reminded me of the woman I had married, not the woman who had walked away. I thought about reaching out to her once, picking up the phone and begging her to reconsider. But pride stopped me, and in truth it was not just pride. It was the memory of her final words in that kitchen. "You'll never be more than a failed dreamer." Those words were a wall between us, a wall that could never be climbed. One evening, I passed by the mansion I had once called home. The lights glowed warmly from inside, and for a moment I imagined walking through the front door, sitting by the fire, and hearing Marina call my name. But the vision shattered as I saw another car parked in the driveway, one I did not recognize. I realized then that she was already moving on, perhaps with someone her mother approved of, someone who would fit Dahlia's standards better than I ever could. I stood in the shadows watching until the cold night air forced me back to my apartment. That was the night I finally understood. My marriage was not just broken, it was buried. The conflict inside me grew sharper each day. I wanted to prove them wrong, to show Marina and her mother that I was not the failure they painted me to be. But I was broke, defeated, and out of options. The construction business was dying. My confidence was gone. My future felt like a barren road with no end in sight. Then came the bitterness toward Marina's father, Harold Crestwood. I had met him only a handful of times. He was quiet, almost distant, and he never interfered in family matters. I convinced myself he agreed with Dahlia, that he looked at me with the same contempt. I cursed him in my mind, lumping him with the rest of them. To me, the entire Crestwood family had turned their backs on me, leaving me to rot. I kept going through the motions, but every day felt heavier. I thought of giving up more times than I cared to admit. Not in the dramatic sense, but in the quiet surrender that comes when a man stops believing his life has meaning. I felt like I was disappearing, piece by piece, into the shadows of the man I once was. What I did not know was that the storm was not over. The worst of it had already passed, but the most unexpected turn was about to come. And it would come in the form of a knock on my apartment door, when a stranger in a suit arrived carrying a briefcase that would change everything. The night before, the knock on my door had been like so many others. I sat in the kitchen of my apartment with a glass of cheap whiskey in my hand, staring at a stack of unpaid bills. The refrigerator rattled, the pipes clanged in the wall, and the silence pressed in around me like a heavy blanket. I had started to believe this was the only life I had left. Work during the day, worry at night, wake up, repeat. The knock came just after noon the next day. It was firm, deliberate, not the kind of knock you hear from a neighbor or a delivery man. I opened the door to find a man in a tailored navy suit standing in the hallway. He was tall, with sharp features and eyes that studied me with an unsettling calm. In his hand, he carried a black leather briefcase, polished to a shine. "Mr. Rourke?" His voice was steady, professional. "Yes," I answered cautiously. "My name is Simon Dillard. I am an attorney. I represent Harold Crestwood. He has asked to meet with you. He believes he has something that belongs to you." At the sound of Harold's name, my stomach tightened. I had not spoken to Marina's father in years. He had always kept to himself, a man of quiet wealth and few words. I had assumed he sided with Dahlia, or at the very least had no interest in defending me. Now here was a lawyer, standing at my door, claiming Harold wanted to see me. I crossed my arms and tried to mask my suspicion. Why would Harold Crestwood want to meet with me? Simon adjusted his grip on the briefcase. "That is something he prefers to explain in person. If you will allow me, I can take you to him now." I looked around my apartment, at the stained carpet, the peeling paint, the empty bottles in the trash. I thought of Dahlia's words, the sting of the courtroom, the smirk on Marina's face as she walked away with everything I had built. My first instinct was to slam the door and send this man back to his employer. I had nothing left to give, no dignity to spare. But curiosity tugged at me. What could Harold possibly have that belonged to me? And why now, months after the divorce had already stripped me bare? I hesitated long enough for Simon to continue. Mr. Crestwood is aware of your situation. He understands what has happened. He insists on seeing you, and he asked me to tell you this. It concerns something important, something only you can understand. Those words landed heavy. Something only I could understand. I felt my throat tighten. Against my better judgment, I found myself nodding. Give me a minute. I grabbed my worn jacket from the chair and slipped it on. As I followed Simon down the hall and into the street, I felt a nervous energy rising inside me. It was not hope exactly, but it was the first spark of something different from the despair I had been drowning in. We rode in silence. Simon's car was clean and smelled faintly of leather. I stared out the window as we drove past the city blocks, the rundown shops and the busy sidewalks. My mind raced with questions. Did Harold want to chastise me for failing his daughter? Did he plan to humiliate me further? Or was this some cruel trick Dahlia had arranged to twist the knife once more? After nearly 30 minutes, we pulled up to a quiet street lined with oak trees. Simon stopped in front of a large brick house, stately but modest compared to the Crestwood mansion I had visited in the past. The house carried a sense of dignity rather than extravagance. Simon turned to me. "Mr. Crestwood is inside. He is expecting you." My palms were damp as I climbed the steps and followed Simon through the front door. The entryway smelled faintly of old wood and tobacco. I heard the faint tick of a grandfather clock from another room. My heart pounded against my ribs. Simon led me into a study filled with bookshelves and heavy furniture. At the center sat Harold Crestwood. His hair was silver, his face lined with age, but his eyes were sharp and steady. He rose from his chair slowly, gripping a cane, and studied me with a look I could not read. "Ethan," he said, his voice calm but deliberate. "Thank you for coming." I nodded stiffly, unsure of how to respond. "Your lawyer said you wanted to see me. I admit I am surprised." He gestured toward a chair opposite his desk. "Sit. There is something we need to discuss." I lowered myself into the chair, my body tense. Simon set the briefcase on the desk in front of Harold, then stepped back. Harold placed his hand on the case but did not open it right away. Instead, he looked me directly in the eye. "I know what my wife has done," he began. "I know what Marina has done, and I know what you have lost. You may think I stood aside and agreed with them, but that is not the truth." His words caught me off guard. I shifted in my seat, waiting, unsure of where this was leading. Harold continued, his voice firm. "I have something that belongs to you, something that was always meant to be yours. I did not intervene before, but I can no longer remain silent. It is time you received what you earned." My pulse quickened as he reached for the briefcase. The click of the latches echoed in the quiet room, and my eyes locked on the case as it slowly opened. The briefcase sat on Harold's desk like a sealed vault. My heart pounded in my chest as he clicked the latches and slowly lifted the lid. I leaned forward without realizing it, my body tense as though bracing for a blow. Inside was a thick stack of documents bound together, along with a few old photographs tucked neatly into a folder. Harold pushed the briefcase toward me. "Go on," he said, his voice steady. I reached out with trembling hands and lifted the documents. At first, I did not understand what I was holding. The papers looked official, covered in legal language, seals and signatures. I flipped through the pages and my eyes widened as the words sank in. Deeds, shares, ownership transfers. They were records of assets worth millions, tied to land developments across California. My name was on them. I looked up at Harold, my voice unsteady. "What is this?" He leaned back in his chair, resting his cane against the desk. It is what you earned years ago. You did not know it then, but the work you did for me was far more valuable than you realized. These developments would never have been completed without your designs, your supervision, your hands. You built more than houses, Ethan. You built empires, and no one ever gave you the credit. My throat went dry. I ran my fingers over the document, still unable to believe what I was seeing. Why are you giving this to me now? Marina and her mother made sure I walked away with nothing. Why would you step in after all this time? Harold's eyes darkened. Because I have watched silently while Dahlia poisoned my family. I have seen the way she twisted Marina, convincing her that money and status matter more than character. I stayed quiet because I thought it was not my place to interfere. But after the divorce, when I saw how far she went to destroy you, I could not stand by any longer. This was always meant for you, not for them. His words hit me like a wave. I tried to steady myself, but the room seemed to tilt. For months, I had been living with the weight of defeat, believing I was worthless, believing Dahlia's voice when she told me I would never amount to anything. And here was Marina's father, the man I thought had dismissed me as a failure, handing me proof that I was worth more than I had ever imagined. I whispered, "I do not know what to say." Harold's voice softened, though his expression remained stern. "Say that you will rise again. Say that you will not let their cruelty bury you. You have been broken, Ethan, but a man like you was never meant to stay broken. This is your chance to stand taller than ever before." Tears welled in my eyes. I had not cried since the day I left the mansion, but now the emotion was too strong to hold back. My hands shook as I set the papers down and covered my face for a moment, overwhelmed by the flood of relief, disbelief, and gratitude. I forced myself to look at Harold again. "Why me? You could have left this for Marina. You could have let Dahlia take it all. No one would have stopped you." A faint smile crossed his face, one that seemed almost sad. "Because Marina never understood what mattered, and Dahlia only ever wanted control. But you, Ethan, you respected me. You respected the work. When others saw me as a checkbook, you treated me as a man. You listened. You asked for advice. You built things with integrity, not shortcuts. I never forgot that, and I will not allow my legacy to pass into hands that do not value it." The room fell silent for a long moment. I sat there, staring at the documents, feeling as though the ground beneath me had shifted. For so long, I had been certain my story was over, that I had been reduced to nothing but failure. Now, in the span of minutes, my future had been rewritten. Harold broke the silence. "This is not a gift. It is recognition. You earned this. All I ask is that you use it well. Build again. Prove to yourself what I already know." I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. My chest swelled with a mixture of pride and determination I thought I had lost forever. I swear I will not waste this chance." Harold studied me closely, then gave a single nod of approval. "Good, that is all I needed to hear." Simon, the lawyer, stepped forward and began explaining the technicalities, the value of the shares, the process of transferring ownership, the immediate access to certain assets. His voice was calm and measured, but my mind was still reeling. Every word confirmed that this was real, that the weight in my hands was not a dream, but a second chance. As the meeting came to an end, Harold rose slowly with his cane. He extended his hand toward me. I stood and gripped it firmly, feeling the strength in his weathered palm. His gaze locked onto mine. "Do not thank me," he said quietly. "Prove me right." I left that house carrying the documents, my head spinning and my heart pounding. For the first time in months, I felt something powerful stirring inside me. It was not just hope. It was a fire, a drive to reclaim everything that had been taken from me, and to rise beyond what Dahlia and Marina ever believed possible. When I stepped back into my small apartment, I looked around at the peeling walls and the sagging mattress. I knew I would not be here much longer. I knew the life I had been clinging to was already behind me. In my hands, I held the key to a future I thought I had lost forever. When I walked out of Harold Crestwood's study carrying that briefcase, I knew my life would never be the same. For months, I had been living in defeat, believing the lies that were spoken over me, letting them shape my sense of worth. But in a single afternoon, Harold reminded me that worth is not handed down by others. It is earned by the way a man lives and the way he treats people. I went back to my apartment and spread the documents across the small kitchen table. For hours, I read every word, letting the reality sink in. These were not scraps. These were opportunities, assets that gave me the means to rebuild. But more important than the money was the validation that I had mattered, that my work had value, and that my life was not defined by Dahlia's contempt or Marina's betrayal. The first thing I did was call Caleb. He answered on the second ring, his voice full of concern, as it always was since the divorce. "You holding up, brother?" I laughed, a sound I had not heard from myself in months. "Better than you think. I just left Harold's house. He gave me something I never expected." Caleb drove over that night. When he saw the papers, he shook his head in disbelief, then clapped me on the shoulder so hard my glass of water spilled. "I told you, you weren't done. You were never done." His words filled me with strength, and for the first time in a long while, I felt proud to look my brother in the eye. With Harold's support and the assets he handed me, I started again. I reopened my construction business, this time with new resources and a deeper determination. The first projects felt like redemption. Every nail hammered, every beam lifted, every wall set into place reminded me that I was not a failure. I was a builder, and I always had been. My crews saw it too. They noticed the fire in me, the drive to lead, and they followed it. Within a year, my company was thriving again. I also moved out of that apartment. It had been a symbol of survival, but I no longer needed to survive. I needed to live. I bought a modest home near the coast. It was not a mansion, but it was mine. And when I looked out the window each morning, I saw possibility instead of defeat. My mother, Irene, visited often. She brought her casseroles, hugged me tightly, and said, "I knew you would rise again." The pride in her voice was worth more than any house or fortune. As for Marina and Dahlia, I heard their lives did not unfold as smoothly as they had hoped. The mansion became a burden, its upkeep too costly without my steady income. Rumors reached me that Marina grew restless, and that Dahlia's sharp tongue, once so powerful, began to wear thin even with her own daughter. I never sought revenge, and I never gloated. Their lives were no longer my concern. My victory was not in their downfall, but in my recovery. The biggest lesson I carried with me was this: a man's worth is not measured by the approval of others. It is not found in the wealth he holds or the house he lives in. Worth is proven in the way he treats people, in his integrity, and in his ability to keep building even after everything crumbles. Harold saw that in me, even when I could not see it myself. His belief gave me the chance to start again, but it was up to me to make something of it. When I think back on those dark months in that small apartment, I remember the weight of despair and the feeling that my life had ended. Now, standing on the other side, I see those months as the foundation for everything that came after. Pain became the fire that forged me stronger. Loss became the soil where new growth began. If there is one truth I want to share, it is this: no matter who turns their back on you, no matter how loudly someone insists you are nothing, they do not define you. You define yourself by how you rise after the fall. I am Ethan Rourke, and I stand here not as the man Dahlia called a failure, but as the man who proved her wrong by living, building, and rising again. And now, I want to turn to you, the ones listening to my story. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, or if it reminded you of your own strength in the face of betrayal, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like this video so others can find it. Leave a comment and tell me what you think, or share a time when you had to rise from nothing. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next chapter. Your support keeps these stories alive. And just as Harold once said to me, I will say to you, rise again.